cops grabbed Jordan Hayes like he was a criminal, yelling racial slurs and shoving him face first onto the bleachers. Mothers and kids watched in shock as he was handcuffed for doing nothing just because he was black. They had no idea he was a U.S. Marshal. Before we start the story, tell me, where are you watching from? And if these stories speak to you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Jordan Hayes, a black U.S. Marshal in his mid-30s, was sitting in the stands at his kid's youth baseball game in Charlotte, North Carolina, wearing a navy blue polo and khaki pants, just enjoying a quiet afternoon with his daughter and her friends. The sun was shining, birds chirping, and the usual buzz of parents cheering filled the air. But that calm shattered in an instant. Out of nowhere, two local cops, Officer Brandon Mills and Officer Ryan Carter, both white and in their standard dark navy uniforms with tactical vests, stormed over with aggressive expressions. They didn't even walk up. They charged. "ID, now!" Mills barked, slamming his hand onto Jordan's car like he owned the place. Jordan froze, confused, raising his hands slowly, trying to stay calm, but the cops weren't listening. The crowd of parents and kids gasped as the officers began yelling assumptions, calling him a thug, and insinuating he was involved in something criminal. Mills and Carter grabbed him roughly, shoving him face first onto the metal bleachers. Jordan felt the cold steel under his chest as Mills pressed down harder, shouting, "Stop resisting, man!" Jordan didn't resist. He couldn't. Every movement from the officers reeked of bias, their faces twisted with contempt simply because of the color of his skin. Children clung to their parents, mothers covering their eyes, and some dads stepped forward shouting, "He hasn't done anything!" But the cops ignored them, ignoring the humanity in front of them, their egos fueled by assumptions and systemic prejudice. Jordan's hands were cuffed tightly behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists. He could feel the judgment in every sneer, every impatient shove, every whispered insult. Even while being restrained, Jordan stayed composed, his mind calculating his options, remembering his rights as a U.S. Marshal. The intensity of the situation escalated as the officers continued shouting commands, their tone dripping with hostility. Every passerby's phone was now raised, recording what looked like an outright abuse of power. People were murmuring, whispering, pointing, shocked at the blatant racism on display. Jordan's heart raced, not with fear for himself, but anger for the injustice unfolding. Every second felt like an eternity as he realized the cops had no idea who they were dealing with. And deep down, he knew this encounter would have consequences. He just didn't know how fast they would hit. The extreme racial bias wasn't subtle. It was in the way Mills glared, the way Carter leaned over, chest out, as if trying to assert dominance over someone they saw as inferior. It was in the words they called him a dangerous black man, insinuating threats that didn't exist. Every push, every shove, every harsh word reinforced a system that assumed guilt based solely on skin color. Jordan gritted his teeth, holding back the instinct to snap, knowing the fallout would be bigger than this small field, this small moment. As the crowd's whispers turned into voices, some people daring to intervene verbally, the officers doubled down, convinced of their own authority. "I don't care who you are," Mills spat. "You're coming with us." That was the moment reality started to twist in their favor, and against them. Jordan remained calm, his body tense but controlled, every muscle ready to react if needed. The sheer audacity of the cops' racial bias collided with the reality that they had just misjudged a U.S. Marshal. Phones continued rolling, capturing the interaction in vivid detail. The officers' sneers, the rough handling, the fear on the faces of bystanders, the children crying, the parents screaming. Jordan's composure contrasted sharply with the chaotic aggression of the white officers. The tension built, every second filled with moral outrage and fear, as the extreme racism in action became undeniable, visible to everyone present. The stifling afternoon sun did nothing to ease the tension on the small baseball field in Charlotte. Jordan Hayes, cuffed and pressed against the cold metal bleachers, could feel every eye on him, parents, kids, and bystanders alike. The officers, Mills and Carter, both white men in their early 30s, wore their dark navy uniforms like armor, their badges gleaming in the sunlight, and their guns strapped to their hips. But it wasn't the uniforms or the weapons that made this encounter terrifying. It was the unrestrained racism seeping through every word, every gesture. Mills leaned close to Jordan's ear, his breath hot and aggressive. "You think you can just sit here? Act innocent? Huh? We know what black men like you do," he spat, the words dripping with contempt. Carter mirrored his partner, looming over Jordan's other side, smirking, shoving him down harder when he flinched at the glare. Jordan's wrists were raw from the handcuffs, but the pain in his skin was nothing compared to the humiliation being poured over him in front of families and children. Every shove, every curse, every dismissive look screamed that he was guilty simply for being black. Parents tried to step forward, fists clenching, voices rising, but the officers ignored them, waving threats and barking orders. "Step back or you're next," Mills shouted, pointing his finger aggressively, as if the very presence of white adults trying to protect Jordan meant they too were a threat. Children gasped, some hiding behind their parents' legs, their small hands trembling as they clutched balloons or snack bags. Every innocent detail of the baseball game, the cheers, the laughter, the crack of the bat hitting a ball, was drowned out by the shouts of the officers and the harsh slap of authority wielded without reason. Jordan's mind was racing. He knew his training as a U.S. Marshal, his years of experience dealing with hostile situations, were the only things keeping him from reacting in a way that might escalate the situation further. But the sheer blatant racism, the confidence the officers had in assuming he was a criminal just for his skin color, made him boil inside. Every racial slur they muttered, every "you better not move" or "we'll see how this goes" comment, drilled the reality deeper. They saw him as less than human. Carter grabbed Jordan's collar roughly, forcing him to stand for a moment, only to push him back down onto the bleachers when he hesitated. "You think your position protects you? Doesn't matter who you are," Carter sneered. Mills joined in, laughing harshly, enjoying the power they wielded. The surrounding crowd could see it, their eyes wide in shock, some pulling out phones, ready to document what could only be described as extreme racial abuse in real time. The parents shouted over the chaos, trying to assert that Jordan was not a threat, but their voices were drowned by the officers' aggressive commands. Jordan tried to remain calm, his back pressed against the cold metal, fists clenched under the cuffed hands. Sweat rolled down his temple, mixing with the anger that threatened to make him snap. But he knew every second counted. Every action could determine how quickly these officers would face the consequences of their reckless, biased behavior. The extreme racism wasn't subtle. It was raw, unfiltered, and on display for everyone present. Every shove, every accusation, every threatening tone was a display of the systemic bias that people so often ignored until cameras caught it in action. Meanwhile, The officers were speaking into their radios, their voices sharp, authoritative, laced with condescension. "Yeah, we got a suspicious black male here. Full compliance isn't happening," Mills reported, ignoring Jordan's calm explanation that he was law enforcement himself. Carter nodded, laughing at the thought that they were in control. The parents, neighbors, and bystanders could feel the absurdity, the audacity of two white officers assuming power over a black man who was, in fact, a U.S. Marshal. It was a textbook example of racial profiling, turned up to a level so extreme it was almost surreal. Jordan's daughter, sitting nearby, cried quietly, sensing the tension and unfairness of the situation, her small hand reaching out to her father. Jordan tried to make eye contact with her, to reassure her without escalating the scene further. But the extreme racism surrounding him, the unchecked aggression, and the assumptions made by Mills and Carter created an oppressive bubble where reason didn't exist. The officers acted as though the world was theirs to control. Mills and Carter weren't cops, blind to the law, blind to the reality that Jordan had authority far beyond their own. As the standoff dragged on, Jordan felt a surge of resolve. The crowd was now buzzing, the tension at a fever pitch. People were recording everything, whispering to each other, some visibly shaking. The extreme racial bias, once subtle and systemic, had become undeniable, fully exposed in public view. Jordan's focus sharpened, ready for the moment the officers would realize they had misjudged a U.S. Marshal, not just a black man. And deep down, he knew this day, this moment, would become a turning point, a clear example of what unchecked racial profiling and systemic bias could lead to when combined with authority. The small baseball field had become a chaotic scene, a battleground where the unchecked prejudice of two officers was on full display. Jordan Hayes, standing cuffed against the metal bleachers, could see the tension radiating off every bystander. Parents were furious, clutching their children close while whispering in disbelief about what they were witnessing. The officers, Mills and Carter, both early 30s, white, stood like sentinels of injustice, chest puffed, badges gleaming, guns at their hips, confident in their authority to terrorize a black man simply for existing. "Move it! Hands where I can feed them!" Mills barked, his tone sharp, venomous, as he shoved Jordan slightly forward. Carter mirrored him, stepping to Jordan's left side, smirking as he circled, assessing Jordan like he was a piece of property rather than a trained U.S. Marshal. Every move was laced with condescension, every word dripping with racial bias. Jordan could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, some horrified, some recording, all witnessing the blatant abuse of power fueled by racism. Jordan's wrists burned where the handcuffs bit into his skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation being broadcast in real time. "You think you're special, huh?" Carter sneered, voice raised, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sitting here, thinking your fancy uniform or whatever makes you safe? Ain't nothing protecting you now." The words were meant to intimidate, to remind Jordan that in the officer's eyes, his skin color defined him as guilty first and human second. Parents shouted, trying to intervene, but Mills waved them off aggressively. "Step back, now. This doesn't concern you," he barked, pointing his finger like a weapon itself. Children gasped, clutching balloons and snack bags, their innocence shattered by the aggression. A few teenagers nearby raised their phones, recording every moment, knowing that this would not stay quiet. The extreme racism of the moment was undeniable. Every shove, every threat, every insult made it clear that these officers felt entitled to exert power over Jordan because he was black. Mills grabbed Jordan's shoulder, spinning him slightly, forcing him to face the crowd. "You got something to say?" he jeered, laughing when Jordan opened his mouth to respond. Carter's smirk widened. "Yeah, talk all you want. We don't care who you are. Just another black man thinking he's above the law," he said, clearly reveling in the power dynamic. The two officers were fully immersed in their bias, their authority amplified by systemic racism, completely oblivious to the fact that Jordan was not only a trained law enforcement professional, but someone with far greater authority than they could ever imagine. Jordan tried to remain calm, knowing that any sudden move could escalate the situation dangerously. Sweat rolled down his temple, mixing with anger and the burning humiliation. Every racial slur muttered under the officers' breaths, every dismissive shove, drilled the truth into the crowd. These men believed that Jordan's skin made him inherently suspicious. The officers' actions were textbook racial profiling, their behavior unchecked and extreme, amplified by the presence of bystanders and cameras. Meanwhile, Carter reached for his radio, speaking into it with an air of superiority. "We've got a suspicious black male here. Full compliance not happening," he said, his tone condescending, completely ignoring Jordan's calm, authoritative explanations that he was a U.S. Marshal. Mills chuckled beside him, clearly enjoying the abuse of power, the way the crowd reacted, the visible fear and frustration in Jordan's eyes. It was a scene of unfiltered racism in action, a live demonstration of prejudice, reinforced by uniforms, weapons, and societal assumptions. The parents were now shouting, some pulling out phones to call for help, some stepping forward in an attempt to shield Jordan. But the officers, entrenched in their bias, ignored them entirely. "Sit down where I tell you," Mills shouted, shoving Jordan back toward the bleachers. Carter followed, circling like a predator, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The extreme racism was now fully visible to everyone. No subtlety, no pretense, just raw, unchecked bias wielded as authority. Jordan's focus remained sharp despite the assault on his dignity. He could sense the crowd's tension, the collective outrage building. Some bystanders whispered, some muttered under their breaths, and some recorded silently, knowing this footage would later be a testament to the extreme racial profiling displayed. The officers, confident in their perceived power, had no idea they were creating evidence of their own misconduct with every action. Jordan's daughter, sitting nearby, tried to reach out to him, frightened and confused. He met her gaze briefly, offering a silent reassurance, knowing that despite the public humiliation and blatant racism, he could not give them the satisfaction of seeing him react violently. The extreme racial abuse continued unabated, every move from the officers serving as a stark reminder to the crowd. This was not about law. It was about control, prejudice, and unchecked authority. By the time the scene had stretched several minutes, Jordan's calmness began to contrast even more sharply with the officers' aggression. The crowd's anger was palpable, their phones recording every violation, every biased command. This was no longer a routine traffic stop at a baseball game. It had become a live example of extreme racial injustice, captured in full view, destined to have consequences far beyond the bleachers. The tension on the baseball field was thick, almost tangible, like the air itself had been charged with anger and fear. Jordan Hayes, still cuffed and pressed against the metal bleachers, felt every eye on him as the two officers, Mills and Carter, continued their intimidation. Their white skin, badges, and firearms gave them a sense of untouchable authority. But the anger radiating from the crowd was starting to crack their facade. Jordan's calm demeanor only seemed to frustrate them further. "Hands behind your back, now," Mills shouted, voice cracking slightly with irritation. He leaned closer, almost face to face with Jordan, as if proximity could somehow reinforce his authority. Carter circled slowly, sneering, clearly enjoying the dynamic, the fear he was inflicting. "Yeah, you think wearing that little uniform makes you untouchable? Ain't no one above us," he spat, voice dripping with venom. Every word was a weapon, laced with racial hatred, a direct assertion that Jordan's skin defined him as guilty and subhuman in their eyes. Jordan could feel the burning indignity of the moment, but he kept his cool. Every push, every aggressive gesture from Mills or Carter was met with measured compliance. His focus was split between protecting himself and reading the crowd. Noticing parents trying to shield their kids, friends muttering, phones recording. The extreme racism on display was so raw that it couldn't be missed. These two officers believed that Jordan's black identity alone justified their aggression, their threats, their public humiliation. One of the parents, an older black man with a baseball cap, stepped forward slightly, muttering under his breath, "This is insane. They got no right," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Mills snapped at him, waving his hand dismissively. "Step back or you're next." The racial undertone in his warning was undeniable. The officers were targeting Jordan specifically, using him as a symbol of control over black men in public spaces, showing the crowd exactly who had power, at least in their minds. Carter reached for his radio, voice elevated as he spoke in clipped, commanding tones. "Unit 3, we got a non-compliant black male. Full detainment protocol. Repeat, full detainment protocol." His eyes flicked toward Jordan, a smirk spreading across his face, clearly enjoying the false sense of authority he wielded. Mills stepped closer, shoving Jordan slightly to assert dominance. The officers weren't just performing a legal duty. They were exhibiting a full-on, extreme racial bias, acting as if the color of Jordan's skin made him inherently dangerous, inherently guilty, inherently deserving of public degradation. Jordan could hear the kids nearby, small voices asking questions, parents murmuring apologies for the scene. But the officers ignored everyone. They weren't concerned with law or protocol. They were concerned with exerting their perceived control, fueled by centuries of systemic racism. Every shove, every yell, every demeaning gesture was a live demonstration of prejudice, fully visible to the crowd. The parents clutched their children close, trying to shield them from witnessing this blatant abuse. Mills leaned in closer, face contorted with anger. "You think just because you've got a badge and a uniform you're untouchable? Not today, boy," he growled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Carter circled, adding, "Yeah, we know what you are. We see you, and you ain't getting away with anything here." Every word dripped with racial contempt, turning a simple detainment into a public display of extreme prejudice. The sweat rolling down Jordan's temple mixed with the anger and humiliation, but he maintained a composed expression. His training, his experience, his awareness of the law, everything told him to remain calm, to not give these men any excuse to escalate further. And yet, the officers pushed boundaries relentlessly, shoving him, barking commands, and using their white privilege as a shield against accountability in front of dozens of witnesses. Nearby, bystanders whispered to each other, some taking videos on their phones, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The officer seemed oblivious to the fact that every aggressive move, every racially charged word was being captured. The extreme racism wasn't subtle. It was on full display, raw and unfiltered. Parents whispered warnings to their children, making sure the young ones understood that what they were seeing wasn't normal or justified, but a clear example of bias and abuse of power. Jordan's focus remained unbroken. He knew that the officer's actions were not just illegal. They were a public demonstration of racial profiling, a clear attempt to assert control over him based on the color of his skin. Each shove, each sarcastic remark, each command was layered with hatred, designed to humiliate him, to reinforce the societal message that black men could be treated with suspicion and aggression simply for existing in public. By the time the chaos had stretched for several minutes, Jordan's composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the officers' escalating aggression. Their extreme racism had turned a routine detention into a spectacle, and the crowd's reactions only amplified the tension. The scene was no longer a simple baseball game. It had become a live case study in racial injustice, bias, and abuse of authority. The entire baseball field felt frozen, like time had paused just to watch Officers Mills and Carter push their authority past every limit. Parents weren't cheering anymore. Kids weren't running around. The summer breeze wasn't enough to move the tension sitting over the bleachers. Everyone's attention was locked on Jordan Hayes, still cuffed, still pinned, still calm, and the two officers who were determined to treat him as a threat simply because he was a black man sitting in public. Officer Mills paced slowly, boots hitting the metal steps with sharp clanks, each step heavier than before. His face was twisted with irritation, but beneath that irritation was something deeper, an anger rooted in prejudice. The fact that Jordan hadn't yelled, hadn't resisted, hadn't reacted emotionally, only seemed to enrage him more. Mills leaned in close, lowering his voice, but making sure everyone around could still hear. "Don't try acting innocent," he muttered. "You people always got a story." The crowd murmured, parents glancing back and forth, shocked at how openly he said it. Even Carter's eyes flicked toward him, like he knew those words crossed a line. But he didn't step in. He didn't correct him. He didn't stop him. He just let the racist remark hang in the air, feeding the tension. Jordan didn't move. His breathing stayed slow and measured. But inside, he felt a tightening in his chest, a familiar, heavy mix of anger and restraint. He'd seen situations like this before, just never directed at him like this, in a place as harmless as a youth baseball field. A couple of parents pulled their kids closer, whispering quietly, "Don't look. It's wrong." Officer Carter stepped behind Jordan, his voice sharp and impatient. "Stand up." Slowly. Jordan rose carefully, hands still cuffed behind him, knees brushing the metal bench. Carter grabbed his arm roughly, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. The unnecessary force was part of the lesson they thought they were teaching him. Mills watched closely, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Got ID or not?" Mills demanded. Jordan turned his head slightly. "My wallet is in my back pocket. You took it when you cuffed me." Carter didn't check the wallet. He didn't even reach for it. Instead, he scoffed. "Yeah, I'm sure you got a real ID." He paused, letting the implications settle over the crowd. "Probably fake." Gasps spread across the bleachers. Even the kids could feel the insult in those words. Parents shifted uncomfortably, shaking their heads. A woman near the bottom row whispered, "They're not even trying to hide it." Jordan could feel dozens of eyes locked on him. He wasn't embarrassed, he was angry. Angry at the humiliation, angry at the assumptions, angry that two officers could look at him and instantly decide he didn't belong here. But he kept his voice steady, controlled. "You're making a mistake." Mills stepped forward instantly, fingers stabbing the air. "Oh yeah? What mistake is that?" Jordan didn't answer, not yet. He wasn't going to explain himself to two men who didn't want the truth. The crowd watched, waiting, sensing something shifting. Carter pulled out his radio again, frustration creeping into his voice. "This guy's giving us trouble, requesting backup." Backup. For a man sitting at a baseball game. For a man with no weapon. For a man who hadn't resisted once. Parents started backing away now. Not out of fear of Jordan, but out of fear of the officers escalating things for no reason. A teenager recording the scene whispered, "They're going overboard. This is straight up targeting." Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, grounding himself. He had handled worse. He had been trained for worse. But this, being treated like a criminal in front of families, kids, strangers, felt different. It felt personal. It felt hateful. Mills leaned in again, voice low but sharp. "Don't try anything smart. You're not walking out of here till we're done with you." Jordan opened his eyes slowly. "I didn't try anything." "Exactly," Carter said with a smirk. "Because you know better." The crowd reacted again. Murmurs, disbelief, anger. People shifted, phones lifted higher, recording everything. The officers didn't seem to care at all that a dozen cameras were aimed at them. Their bias was too deep, too familiar, too normalized between them. Then, quiet footsteps approached. A woman, holding her son close, took a small risk and spoke up. "Officer, he didn't do anything. He was just watching the game." Mills spun around instantly, eyes blazing. "Ma'am, do not interfere. Stay back." She held her ground. He wasn't bothering anyone. Carter stepped forward, trying to intimidate her too. "Ma'am, this is a law enforcement operation. Don't get involved." The woman stared at him, unblinking. "This is wrong. Everyone here sees what you're doing." The crowd grew bolder. Subtle nods, faint whispers, shifting feet. People weren't just uncomfortable anymore. They were witnessing racism in real time. So blatant, it felt unreal. Jordan watched quietly as the officers tried to control the situation they had created. Mills was tapping his foot, jaw clenched, eyes darting around, as if he could sense that the moment was slipping from his grip. Carter kept looking toward the parking lot, waiting for backup. Jordan spoke again, calm and steady. "You're going to want to slow down." Mills stepped closer, face inches from Jordan's. "Oh, are we now?" he snapped. "And why's that?" Jordan didn't answer. Not with words. He didn't need to. Not yet. Because the moment he said who he really was, everything would change. The temperature on that baseball field didn't actually rise, but it felt hotter, like every breath carried tension. Everyone sensed it. The officers pushing harder, the crowd getting braver, and Jordan standing in the center of it all, still cuffed, still calm, still watching everything with a quiet control the officers completely misunderstood. Officer Carter's radio crackled again. Backup was a few minutes out. That should have reassured him, but it didn't. His hand trembled slightly, barely noticeable, but Jordan had seen men under pressure for years. He recognized the signs. Carter wasn't scared of Jordan. He was scared of the crowd, the phones, the consequences he couldn't yet see. Officer Mills, though, Mills was different. He thrived on the attention. The cameras weren't a threat. They were an audience. He stepped forward with a heavy, slow confidence, boots echoing off the metal bleachers. He pointed toward Jordan, like he was addressing the entire field. Just so every one of you folks understands, this man refuses to follow directions. That's why we're here. The crowd reacted instantly. No, he didn't, a man shouted from the third row. He was just sitting there, another woman yelled. Mills ignored them. He kept his eyes locked on Jordan, smirking like he owned the moment. You can roll your eyes all you want, he said loudly. But when we ask questions, you answer. Simple. Jordan's jaw tightened, not because he was losing composure, but because he could feel the weight of humiliation deepening. It wasn't the force. It wasn't the cuffs. It was the way Mills took pleasure in the spotlight, using him as a prop. Jordan lifted his chin slightly. I answered everything you asked. Simple. Mills snapped instantly. Yeah? Then why don't I believe you? The parents gasped. Even Carter winced a little. The racism wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible, sharp, and loud. You could practically feel it landing on the field like a slap. Jordan didn't look away. You don't believe me because you didn't want to. Mills stepped even closer. Too close. Breath brushing Jordan's ear as he leaned in. People like you always got something to hide. A ripple ran through the bleachers. Shock, anger, disbelief. A teenager recording whispered, He didn't just say that, did he? Jordan held Mills' stare. What exactly do you think I'm hiding? Before Mills could respond, a baseball coach walked over. Hat still on, whistle hanging around his neck. His voice was steady but strong. Officers, you need to rethink what you're doing. There are kids here. Carter turned sharply. Coach, step back. Now. I'm not interfering, the coach said. I'm saying this is excessive. Parents nodded. The tension changed again, shifting from fear to collective anger. The officers were losing control, and they knew it. Mills' face went red, jaw locked tight. Jordan watched them carefully. You're escalating something that shouldn't have been anything. Carter snapped back. Quiet. Jordan didn't. You've made assumptions. And now you're trying to justify them. For the first time, Carter hesitated. Just a flicker. But enough. Mills was the one spiraling, though. His voice rose sharply. We don't need your commentary. We decide what's suspicious. A mother near the sideline called out, Suspicious? He's been sitting the whole time. Her little daughter clung to her hand, staring at Jordan with wide eyes. Mom, why are they doing that to him? She whispered. Her mother's voice cracked. I don't know, honey. Jordan's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this child was watching racism unfold like a lesson she never asked for. Mills barked out another order. Face the fence. Jordan didn't move. Not out of defiance, out of disbelief. They were still pushing, still doubling down, still trying to show dominance in front of families. I'm not resisting, Jordan said quietly, but I'm not turning my back while you escalate. Carter stepped up, grabbing Jordan's arm again. Unnecessary force in every movement. You don't get to choose. Turn around. Jordan exhaled slowly. You really want to go down this road? Mills scoffed. Oh, we're already on it. Parents shook their heads. Phones kept recording. The tension swelled like a wave. Jordan finally spoke, not loudly, not aggressively, just with a calm that sliced through the chaos. I'm telling you one last time, you're about to make a mistake you won't recover from. Mills leaned in with a mocking grin. And what are you gonna do? You're in cuffs. Jordan met his glare. No, I'm warning you for your sake. Carter froze, eyes narrowing. What does that mean? Jordan paused, letting the silence land across the field. He didn't reveal anything yet. Not until they made their next move. And he could feel it coming. The tipping point. The moment everything would flip. A mother whispered, "Something's about to happen." And she was right. The officers were seconds away from crossing the final line and from learning exactly who the man they humiliated truly was. The sunlight was beginning to dip behind the field lights, stretching long shadows across the baseball diamond as the confrontation reached its peak. The entire bleacher section had fallen into that tense, suffocating quiet, the kind that always comes right before something explodes. Officer Mills stood stiffly in front of Jordan, fists clenched, embarrassment and stubborn pride burning through his expression. Officer Carter hovered behind, radio in hand, breathing fast, unsure if they should keep pushing or finally step back. And Jordan? Still cuffed, still calm, still watching them with the patience of someone who wasn't worried in the slightest. That bothered the officers more than anything. A man in cuffs shouldn't look confident. A man surrounded shouldn't seem in control. And yet Jordan did, and they couldn't understand why. Mills snapped first. "Turn around." His voice was sharp, cracking with frustration. Jordan's eyes didn't blink. No. Gasps filled the bleachers. Parents shifted uneasily. Kids, clutching snacks and baseball gloves, looked around like they were witnessing something adults should have prevented. Mills stepped even closer, jaw tight. "You're refusing a lawful command." Jordan answered without raising his voice. "I'm refusing an unnecessary one." Carter tried to salvage the situation. "Sir, just cooperate." Jordan cut him off. "I cooperated." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Controlled, steady, final. The crowd could feel the officers losing the narrative. Carter's radio crackled again. Backup was a minute out. If they didn't get control now, they'd look weak, even to their own team. So Mills doubled down. Again and again. He grabbed Jordan's arm harder, tightening his grip, trying to jerk him toward the fence. "You don't get to tell us what's necessary." Jordan didn't move an inch. He didn't fight. He simply stood his ground. And then, with a composure that completely unnerved both officers, Jordan said quietly, "You're about to cross a line you won't come back from." Thunder rolled through the crowd in the form of shocked whispers. Carter frowned deeply. "What is that supposed to mean?" Jordan looked him in the eye. "It means the moment you push this any further, everything changes for you." Mills scoffed loudly. "You think you're scaring us?" Jordan, "No, I think you don't realize what you're doing." Mills stepped back, rolling his eyes dramatically for the crowd. "Oh, here we go. Another guy who thinks he's gonna sue the department." But Jordan shook his head. "I'm not talking about lawsuits." Something in his tone, steady, heavy, certain, made Carter hesitate. A father holding a toddler whispered to his wife, "He's not bluffing. Listen to him." Mills didn't listen. He shoved Jordan lightly toward the fence. "You're obstructing. Don't make this worse." Jordan inhaled slowly. Then he finally said the words that made Carter's breath stop cold. "I am a Deputy U.S. Marshal." Silence. Instant. Total. Deadly. The officers froze. The crowd froze. Even the birds on the power line seemed to stop moving. Mills blinked rapidly like he hadn't heard correctly. Carter took a half step back. Wait, what did you just say?" Jordan turned his body slightly, just enough for the badge clipped inside his belt to catch the light. "I said I'm a U.S. Marshal, and you've detained me without cause." Gasps shot through the bleachers like fireworks. Phones zoomed in. Kids stared wide-eyed as if watching the climax of a blockbuster movie. Mills stammered, "To that badge, how do we know it's real?" Jordan looked directly at him. "Run my name." Carter swallowed hard. "What is your name?" Jordan didn't hesitate. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Jordan Price, Task Force Division." The name hit the officers like a punch. Even some parents reacted. They'd heard of that task force. It wasn't local. It wasn't small. It wasn't something officers like Mills and Carter should ever be confronting like this. Jordan added quietly, "You should call your supervisor, right now." Carter's face drained of color. He fumbled with the radio, voice suddenly shaky. "This is Unit 34, requesting immediate command staff." Mills stepped back, completely thrown off, his earlier arrogance collapsing fast. This isn't... We didn't know." Jordan finally looked away from them and toward the crowd, speaking for everyone to hear. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask." Mills dropped his gaze. Carter froze, still holding the radio. The field went silent again. The moment had shifted. The power had flipped. Everything the officers thought they controlled was gone. And the part that none of them were prepared for was that Jordan had only just started. Officer Hayes pulls out Marcus's wallet, still acting tough. But the moment he sees the badge, his entire body freezes. He blinks twice, like he can't believe what he's looking at. He turns the wallet toward the light and reads it again. It's real. It's official. It's federal. Hayes whispers, voice shaking. "Brennan, we messed up. He's a U.S. Marshal, active duty." People in the stands go silent, staring at Marcus, like the whole world just flipped upside down. The same crowd that watched him get shoved around now watches the officers panic. Officer Brennan, who was speaking loudly the whole time, slowly steps back. His face loses color. He stumbles over his words. "Sir, we didn't know," he says quietly. Marcus finally stands. Everything under those bleachers went dead quiet, so quiet that the only sound left was the faint clink of the cuffs. Officers Brennan and Hayes still had Marcus pinned down, but their confidence was gone. The look in their eyes wasn't authority anymore. It was pure fear. Marcus spoke in a pulled, steady voice, every word landing like a warning. "I gave you a chance to slow down, but I guess you only learn when everything's on record." A mother, standing a few feet away, still shielding her crying son, whispered through shaky breaths, "Sir, please just tell them who you are. They went way too far." Marcus glanced at her for a moment, then looked right back at the officers. The moment he mentioned the inside pocket of his jacket, where his credentials were, Officer Brennan froze. Officer Hayes nearly dropped his radio. Their hands were shaking, panic creeping through every inch of them. They both knew this wasn't a small mistake. This was career-ending. Marcus said quietly, "You put me face down in front of a whole crowd with no reason, no check, no threat." Hayes stuttered, trying to save himself. "Sir, we were just doing our job." Marcus paused, then replied, "No, you were abusing your badge." He locked eyes with both officers, then delivered the line that shook the entire field. "I'm a U.S. Marshal." The families in the bleachers went silent. You could actually hear people gasp. Brennan exhaled like someone had ripped the ground from under him. Then replied. Hayes scrambled to unlock the cuffs, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even grip the key. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Stop. I'll get them removed properly. You just call your supervisor." Brennan grabbed his radio with trembling fingers. "Dispatch, we need a supervisor at Eastfield Park, right now." Around them, the crowd started whispering. These officers are done. Arresting a marshal for nothing? DOJ is gonna eat this alive. When the supervisor arrived, the whole place felt like it froze. He checked Marcus's credentials, then looked at the officers. He dropped his eyes to the ground for a moment before speaking. Mr. Grant will issue a formal apology. What happened today was unacceptable. Marcus nodded once. We'll handle it the right way. What you write today becomes part of the record. Both officers were pale, barely breathing. They knew internal affairs would be knocking, and the DOJ Civil Rights Division might follow. Marcus stood up from the bleachers and walked toward the crowd. People instinctively stepped aside, giving him space, giving him respect. The badge inside his jacket caught a soft flash of sunlight, and that small glint was enough to show the officers exactly how dark their future now looked. At the exit of the field, Marcus stopped, turned back, and said, "Never target someone because of their skin. Every person has a story, and sometimes that story is a lot bigger than you think."